All right, all right. Well, I am so super excited to have you a guest on our episode today, Jeff Eckart. I'm just over the moon excited about what God's going to do in and through this time that we get to chat here together. The name of my podcast is What Leaders Do. And quite frankly, I'm looking for anybody in the church world, in the business world, just personal lives that are leading and influencing others. And I'm just trying to share all that God's teaching me and through the people that I admire and follow and love, exactly what it looks like to be a leader, whether you are there yet or not. And so we just talking about everything that leaders do. And I thought today, I would love to interview you. And I'm going to get to the reason why I'm interviewing you here in just a minute, but I want to give you a proper introduction. And so, for those of you that are jumping on with me, Jeff Eckart and I met years ago. Like, I'm even scared to say how many years ago it was, because I was in high school or college, early college years, when you became a really big part of my brother and sister's life, serving as the youth pastor at our local church. And I know you worked with the local church for over 20 years. And now you've been serving as the founder and CEO of Never the Same. And that's been 10 years you've been doing that. Obviously, you are a dad of 3 beautiful girls, married to Ariana, and I just love her dearly. So thankful to have her in my life as well. And more recently, we were able to get connected because you asked me to be on the board for Never the Same. And I remember when you asked me to do that, I was thinking, that has nothing to do with where I'm at in my life personally or professionally, until all of a sudden it just dawned on me that my son was about to be in middle school. And I was like, oh, yep, we're there. And this is right. Where we're at right now. But I know you're a board member for National Day of Prayer, and I could go on and on and on and on, but I think that's enough. I'm just excited that you said yes to be here. And I know you're actually getting ready to do something pretty amazing. So the fact that we could fit this in with such short notice, thank you.
Oh, yeah, Cami, I'm a huge fan. I mean, it's funny. There's a few people I watch on social media. Your family's part of that, but I was always watching what you're saying, the tone, the messaging. You're obviously very inspiring to many people, but to me personally, to our family, to my wife and I, but also to Olivia, it is awesome to be with you. I can't wait for the conversation.
Well, it's funny because I'm going to make sure our listeners kind of have a little background. You know why I asked you to be on this, but of all the podcasts I listen to, of all the conferences I've been to, of all the sermons I've tapped into, there's only a few that really resonate with me. And I will never forget. And like I said, early on when we first met, you were very much involved with my brother and sister. I was at college, I wasn't around. And yet I came home one weekend, you were speaking for the main church that day, and you spoke on a topic called divine appointments. And for whatever reason, it literally left such an imprint on me, and it's something that I'm still wondering what that impression was left for, but I'm thankful for it every day. And it just has been something that I thought, I feel like the world needs to hear you talk about divine appointments, because I think it's something that we don't recognize God's hand at work in our life enough. And I believe when he's moving, you feel it, even if you're, I don't know, is that him? And I know you can walk us through that. So I don't know if you want to jump into, because I'm dying to hear you tell that story again about how you and Ariana met, but if you want to start there, or do you want to take a minute? Because I really think there's a lot going on in our world today, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can be more of an active part.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to jump into divine appointments. But, we were talking a little bit offline, and we stay in pretty steady touch, but boy, as we record this, I'm living in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where area where you grew up and your family and stuff, your brother and sister. But, even in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I live, smaller city, very conservative. We had riots this last weekend. We've seen riots happen all over the country. What's interesting as a believer is yesterday on May 31st, 2020 was Pentecost Sunday. So number one, a day to recognize you and your family. But, that day is I grew up really not really knowing much about that in our church calendar, but Pentecost Sunday is the day that we commemorate and celebrate in the annual church calendar, what happened in Acts 2? What happened when the believers were gathered together and the Holy Spirit came and moved in this way that really propelled the church outward. And, that one of the images and the imagery of original Pentecost is the imagery of fire. And we saw fire all over the country in other ways this weekend. And, it's funny. I was thinking recently that, when the wind blows, it affects a candle or a forest fire in completely different ways. So a wind that blows will easily snuff out one solitary candle. But that same wind with the same force will hit a forest fire and it will exponentially increase it. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, Scripture talks about how both those things, both the ways that a fire can spread in a wildfire can be positive or negative. Matthew 13, Jesus talks about the parable of the mustard seed and the parable of the yeast. And both those things, I think that Jesus, in my opinion, was using both positive and negative as an example. A small little seed that's a bad seed, so to speak, can grow and have a lot of influence in a negative way or in a positive way. Same thing with a little bit of yeast in the dough. And what we saw from the tragic events that I believe everyone is universally condemned that happened to Mr. Floyd, now we've got this trifecta of crises that I don't think we've ever seen in American history. We've got a health crisis, a financial crisis, and we've got a racial crisis. And I was reading in the Seattle Times where the author of the story was saying that they don't think that America can make it right now, that we need healing. If we don't get healing, we can't make it. And written from a non-faith perspective, you can read that and go, okay, we need more politicians, pills, or programs, right? And we believe as followers of Jesus that this is at a much higher level, that the healing that we need is something that only God can do. And that's been my prayer. And I just want to encourage anyone listening that's a person of faith, that prayer is the most strategic, but I also believe the most unifying thing that we can do right now. And, we are calling adults and students to gather on July 4th to pray for healing at noon Central. We're asking people to go to their local schools and pray for a few minutes, and we're going to guide them through that with a participatory live stream. But just to mention that to everyone, if you're interested in that, if they just go to claimyourcampus2020.com, and if you're an adult listening to this and you may or may not have kids, doesn't really matter. We're all connected to a school in our community. Get some people together, go to your school, and let's pray for healing. But that's what we need. And prayer really is the key to the solution. And that solution is Christ. He's the peacemaker. And I'll say one more thing. It's interesting that, and I heard my dad say this when I was young and I never forgot it. The 12 disciples in Scripture and the Gospels, there was amongst that group of 12, there was Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector. Now, Zealot was like what I would probably call, like, just in trying to use human terms, like super right wing, very far right. Tax collector would be very far left. So complete opposite ends of the spectrum. A zealot was like wanting to overthrow the government. They were almost like anarchists. And a tax collector was a complete sellout to this foreign government that was, overarching and ruling over Israel. And so they were a sellout to their own people. And yet what my dad said was only in the presence of Christ could these two people be in the same group and in the same room and not rip each other's, throats out. So Christ is the unifying force, and we need to be praying for unity and looking to a higher place. The thing that God's been repeatedly saying to me over this COVID situation is look higher, look higher, look higher. Don't look to the governor. Don't look to the president. Look higher. Psalm 121, I believe it is, I look to the mountains. Where does my help come from? That psalm of ascents where they were singing this and reciting this on their way to Jerusalem to worship as they were ascending into the city. I look to the mountains, where does my help come from? And help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot stumble, not let you stumble and fall. So that's where our hope is. And we've got to be in humble prayer and in a heart of humility as we listen and hear the pain in people's lives that's really real.
I like that. And it's interesting because, Jeff, I have three really. I have three African-American godsons. I have, sorry, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
It just breaks my heart. But I think sometimes even asking questions and being there to be a listening ear for what other people endure on a regular basis that we can't understand. And I know even as a woman, I experience different things than the patriarchal society we live in, and I think that this is beyond race. It really is about just almost underappreciating all of God's people, or putting a label on the value of one over the other. And it's just heartbreaking. But I do agree. I couldn't agree more that he is the unifying force, and prayer is our weapon right now, Yeah. And I love that you've got the prayer coming up on July 4th, actually. And I think that's going to be really, really important. I believe that as raising up the next generation, this will be an incredible way to bring them into the conversation and also equip them with the power of prayer to be able to navigate things like this that, and I think that's how we can create even more changes, really get to that next generation.
Yeah. We've talked about it a little bit, I think offline too, but we don't have a lot of time to get into it, but to briefly mention, talking with a man who's an elder statesman in the First Nations people. He's a Native American. His name's Nigel Big Pond. He's been a mentor of mine over the last few years. We're on the board of the National Day of Prayer together. I was talking to him about some of these painful things that our nation and that his people, a lot of Native American tribes have gone through. And he said that some of these moves, the young warriors were out in front of the tribe, driving and propelling them forward while the elders were in the back providing guidance and wisdom. And he said, if not for the youth and excitement and the passion and the literal energy of these young people, a lot of these tribes may not have survived. And what we're finding right now, I think what's being lost maybe in the conversations that we're having, they're big ones, they're important ones. How do we reemerge from this crisis, and how do we get through now this newer layer that's been underlined for years in discrimination and systematic racism, but it's one generation needing another. We need the young warriors, the young women and the young men, and we need the elders, which, you and I are kind of becoming in society right now. We're becoming, as crazy as that is.
I'm like, wait, did you just on recording say I'm becoming the older generation? Is that what I just heard you say?
It's funny. Like I did, and it's
cancel the whole thing.
But the wisdom of experience. Because here's the thing, like when you were young, when I say young, I mean like 18 and younger. You thought someone in their 40s was ancient. You know what I'm saying? And I know you and I. It's weird. I've been envisioning and seeing more and more how I'm transitioning in my own life into, I'll just speak for me here, but into this like more of a sage role for these younger people, especially like in their 20s and younger. They need the guidance. And so in society and the church and every layer and facet of it, we need each other. So I think going through this crisis, we need to find the passion of young people that are out expressing themselves, maybe, in appropriate or inappropriate ways even, but they care. They're passionate, and we need to connect with them. So I know we're not talking about that today, but it is. I'm glad you mentioned that, Cami, because it's so important right now at this moment that we not ignore what's happening, and that we do really listen to our friends, having 3 daughters and raising them in a way, like you mentioned, in a patriarchal society, to understand that, to overcome it, to not be a victim to it, but to be in a healthy sense aware. And for, you know, a lot of our friends of color, their experiences are just completely different, and just being there to listen and to hear and to support and lend our voice where we can, you know.
I like that. And, you know, it was a little over a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago, that I did my last podcast. And so this hadn't happened yet. And I just thought there's no way that we can do this right now and not talk about it. You know, and I wanted to hear your heart behind it, because I know you're very thoughtful and very prayerful. And just like I asked you to be a part of this today was because you left such an impression on me that day. You shared the power of divine appointments. And Jeff, as we transition to that, I don't even know if you remember that sermon. I just oh my gosh, there's like literally like 3 messages my growing up years that like were literally catalytic. Is that the word? and just kind of forming me, because they were part of some of my formative years. And so I think it's cool that you were real close with my brother and sister younger on, but now today I'm getting a chance to get closer, and I am definitely going to have Olivia on. Olivia is impressive. She is so wise beyond her years, and maybe I'll just have her get on and sing, and we'll just
Hey, you've been such an encouragement and a inspiration to her, you know, as someone who's out there just making it happen. So yeah, you know, so that message was like about 20 years ago. And, you know, it's so kind when someone remembers your words, especially when you don't really remember them. I do remember some of the stories, and I've always been fascinated by how these little seemingly insignificant moments really become formative for our lives. And, you know, I've asked people this, and this would be an interesting conversation too, and it connects here, but like I've asked people, what are some of their most life-altering moments? And divine appointments are life-altering moments. And here's what I've found just in asking probably about 150 to 200 people. I've said, give me some of your top 3 to 5 most formative moments. And almost always they occurred within about 10 seconds or less. Usually they were like some kind of epiphany where all of a sudden it's like all the pieces just snapped together. And one of those moments we see in scripture is at the end of the Gospel of John, where John and Peter were running to the tomb and they saw the burial clothes, and it says they saw and believed. That word believed, it kind of is this picture like a puzzle just coming together, where it's like all the things they had heard and experienced in 3 years all of a sudden just snapped together. And I think divine and life-changing appointments are these moments where things just click. And a lot of time, and these were all random. When I asked people, one guy I remember saying he was out mowing his grass. Another one, you know, driving your car, or maybe at a conference, or most of them though were just random things. And so the story that really that you remembered that I love to tell is what happened to me in the summer of 1991. It was July 29th. I was in college. I was traveling for a small Christian school that I attended, Indiana Wesleyan, and I traveled going with a team of 4 of us going to different summer camps all summer to just work there and represent the school. We got split up for 1 week. 1 week we were going to New Jersey. So me and another team member went there, and then another team member, 2 of them went to Virginia, to Roanoke, Virginia. I got to the New Jersey part, and here's what's funny is the camp that I was going to was called Mount Misery Camp in New Jersey.
What a name.
I know. It's like, do I want to spend a week in Mount Misery, New Jersey, you know? And we got there and it just didn't feel right. A lot of things that we were told weren't the case, the reality about, you know, what we were to be doing and who was going to be there. And it was weird, but it just didn't feel right. So I called my supervisor. This is before cell phones and internet and all this, is 1991. And he said, go back to your host home in Baltimore and you just wait out the week. So we went back to Baltimore, and it was, number one, a miracle that he let me out of that, because we were there representing school. So it really gave the school a bad name that we bailed, but for some reason he did. And then we went to Baltimore and we were there one day, and then our supervisor called and said, go ahead and go to Roanoke. Virginia to where your other two team members are, and they'll let you help out at camp. So it was a 6-hour drive. We got in this borrowed car. It was a Volkswagen Fox with no air conditioning, and it was 100 degrees.
Oh, jeez.
Never forget it. We got there. I was like a hot mess. And the first thing I did, it was 7:00 Eastern on July 29th. And I got in line for the snack bar at this camp. And about 2 or 3 people in front of me, I noticed this young lady in line, and someone said to me, hey, she's going to go to Indiana Wesleyan this fall. So this was July. Indiana Wesleyan is where I went to college, and it happened to be the same young lady that I had noticed. And so I was like, oh, so I want to meet her. So we started talking, and I thought about all the things that led up to that moment, like, splitting up, being at that random camp, and then leaving, and then going here, all the things that seemingly kind of like clicked together. And then when I walked away from that meeting, and I walked to the other side of the parking lot with one of the other guys on my team, Brad, and I remember looking over and saying, that's the one right there. That's the one I'm going to marry. And I was kind of half joking, but like, it was definitely like, oh man, if I could ever marry her, I just, felt the energy, the connection. And then after we were married for about 10 years, I heard her say, and she told me, I think it was in a party or something, she said that she walked away and she was with a friend and she pointed to me, and we were probably like 100 yards apart. But she said, watch that be the guy that God makes me marry. And, like, I thought the first couple of times she told that story, she was, just kidding to add with mine, but she was totally serious. And so from that little divine appointment where we met, there's a lot of story in between, but then we ended up, now we've been married almost 27 years, kind of crazy to think about.
Well, and I think so many times in life we make plans. You're going to this camp and you get there and it's falling apart. And so often we just think nothing's going in my favor, and, everything's working against me. And I would call that we can pray that prayer on a regular basis, that we can make plans, but God, will you please direct my steps? I think that was an exact manifestation of that prayer, is like,
yeah.
Your plans, and sometimes the plans, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're just not in alignment with God's best for us. And so, yeah,
every detour, like that, like all these things fell through. And the scripture that you referenced, Proverbs 16:9, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps, So it's okay. Like you said, we need to have our plans and purposes, but what do we do when those plans get yanked from us? So what do we do when COVID happens? What do we do in the situation where all of a sudden now, it seems like our nation is getting ripped apart racially? Or what do we do when, a family or friend, has cancer? What do we do when we have our plans, and how do we respond? And when things change, that's when the beautiful moments from God happen that we could never orchestrate on our own. And that's one of the main reasons for me why I point to faith in my own life as real, is because adding up one, and not even all, but just one circumstance in my life, sometimes there is no way. It's so coincidental, it's ridiculous. The odds are ridiculous. So for me, that's one of the best, for me, proofs of God and faith is that things happen, and when they happen and how, you can't explain away the timing of it. So I love talking about divine appointments, and it almost always happens when something that we're thinking to do or planning to do falls apart or detours, and then God leads us into this other beautiful excursion.
And that's where that verse that comes to my mind, I'm doing a new thing. Can you not perceive it? And so I really believe it was that sermon and you talking about these coincidences that you can't, you can't deny, right? Undeniable timing, undeniable events being orchestrated. But I think it also gave me the perspective. It really helped me to trust that God's using all things, right? And that He's got a divine plan, and that if I can just stay, probably never perfectly, but if I can just stay on the plan. And sometimes these detours or things falling apart never feel good, but you can look back and go, wow, that was what He was trying to accomplish in that season. So you said there are things to look for when God is moving. Can you talk to me about that for a minute?
Yeah. When a lot of the times I think the things we look for are the timing of when things happen. To me, the number one thing with a divine appointment, in my own experience, is the timing of it. And like, for example, when we were considering quitting our role at a local church and then starting this nonprofit national youth ministry called Never the Same, this was in 2008. Now, if you go back in time, if you can remember, 2008 was one of the craziest financial times, definitely of my lifetime up to that point. Now, what we're going through right now rivals it, probably will. But, as you're listening to this in the middle of this COVID deal, like, just imagine if you felt like God might be saying to you, quit your job, leave your security in the midst of all this craziness, start a nonprofit ministry really with no plan. That's kind of where we were. And so my wife and I decided to go out to Applebee's to get away from the kids and living on our big youth pastor's budget. We hung out at Applebee's and we're sitting there talking about, this is crazy. Like, how could we leave our job with our 3 little girls at that time and do this? And God created this divine appointment that changed our lives forever. Because as we're talking, it's coming out of Ariana's mouth, and she said, how can we be asking anyone for money right now during these times? And right when she said that, someone walked up to our table, and he stood there at the end of our table and kind of awkwardly looked down at us as we were sitting there. I remember looking up, and we were in such an important moment in this conversation. And this was an interruption. And I said, can I help you? Kind of with a little bit of attitude, like, hey, buddy, what are you doing here? This is private. And he said, Jeff, this is his exact quote. He said, you're doing God's work. And he put down $20 on the table. And at that point, just because of the timing of it, I honestly don't remember if he introduced himself or not, but he left. And it was a restaurant in our neighborhood. And I have no idea who he was. I've never seen him before, since that I know of. And that was the timing of not only that environment and circumstance, but like that moment. And what I tell people is, you watch for the timing, because timing is everything to divine moments and divine appointments. Things happening when they do, and how God's able to do that is really remarkable. And you can't overlook those moments when those things happen. And, Cammie, you were part of another one, because when you were on the board in our ministry, I had been called at a conference. I felt like God had said, hey, leave your job, do this. It was on November 1st, 2008. And we began discussing it. And then a year later, on November 1st, randomly, I didn't plan this, but that ended up being the first day that our ministry started, November 1st, 2009. Well, you remember we had that fire in our building. That was when you were on the board. And someone, came into our building and committed arson 3 days before our summer camps were starting. And that whole story was, we were getting ready for camp, and we would always take all of our stuff and all of our gear. And so for those of you listening, we do something called NTS Camp. We load up all this gear and we travel. We're this traveling circus. We go to college campuses. We don't own property for our camps, and we put on the program, and churches bring their students. And so our guy on staff loaded our stuff into the truck a day early. This was in June of 2015. And I asked him, like, why did you do that? And he said, I don't know. I just felt like we needed to. Well, that night, I mean, literally about 6 or 7 hours after we had everything loaded in our truck, someone broke into our building that night and destroyed everything. And we lost almost everything in our ministry. And that, was again, a divine moment, because our guy, the timing of him putting that in there, we're looking for a new building. And Cammie, you went through that building with me, and it felt right, this new building after we lost our old one. And then I thought, well, I don't know if we could afford it, blah, blah, blah. You remember all that stuff. And then I went back and looked at the lease, and it was open for lease on November 1st, 2015. And so the other thing I look for is in what I call individual patterns. Now, I think sometimes we look at other people's patterns and we go, well, God provided a divine appointment this way for them. And sometimes it happens. But what I find is it's kind of personalized. I think God in his, what I say is his poetically prophetic way of working in our lives individually. Like, he does it in a very beautiful and poetic way. And for me, he's given me that November 1st date as a recurring thing. I could tell you other things, but so it's like looking for timing and then looking for individual patterns. So what are things that are happening in your life that seem to be somewhat of a rhythm or a connection, or, sometimes it's tied to a person or a date or a circumstance or a geographic location even, where God just seems to do something for you there. It may be like a conference or, a certain speaker or whatever, but I think those things are important as well.
Well, it's funny you say that, because November 1st is actually my birthday. And I think I've told you that before.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So you keep saying November 1st. I'm like, huh? November 1st. What?
Yeah,
November 1st.
yeah.
That's my birthday.
Yeah, that's right.
There's another reason why this is all happening. And we don't know. We don't know yet sometimes what's happening, but that's really cool. That's a very special number to me too.
Yeah. And, I remember that this year because, social media, your birthday popped up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's a date that just is so personal to me and to us. So it's pretty amazing.
Well, Jeff, help for somebody that's new in their walk with Christ, or maybe doesn't have a relationship with Christ. I mean, is it possible that God is still working on their behalf? And is it possible that, how would they, with a little experience, truly be able to process these kinds of things happening for them? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What's so amazing about God, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, is because whether or not we recognize it, or whether or not we care, whether or not we have devoted or committed our allegiance to Christ, he's still doing those things in our behalf. And sometimes we recognize, people call it different things, it's karma or the fate of the universe or whatever people may say. But God in his wisdom, there's a big fancy word we use in theology, his sovereignty, meaning like he's, overseeing everything, and somehow he's in all things. And so those listening, those friends of ours listening, I want to encourage you to just know that these divine things really have little to do with us. And it's not like God is showing favoritism, to those people that follow him. Although, when we do follow him, we get to lean in and hear closer, and we get to see more fully what he's doing. And so if you're listening to this and you haven't made that choice, I just want to encourage you right now as you're listening. This is a great opportunity, because, in these times of uncertainty, as I've been, limited, but around and interacting with people. And, I always ask people, hey, how you doing during all this? And they ask me, and I go, you know what? I got a Father on my side. I got God that's looking out for me, and I'm good. And sometimes you can tell if that resonates, but it always gets people's interest. And that's for me, what I know is true for you listening today, that what an amazing opportunity to be in a living, loving relationship with the Father that's perfect, that loves you. And it reminds me of Psalm 37:23, the Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. And, when you find your delight in God, he will your life is built upon a rock. And Jesus tells a story in the Gospels about, there's certain people in life, it's like they build their house on sand, and there's certain people that build their house on the rock. And his point was, if you build your life on God and his promises and his truths, then when the storms happen, when COVID happens, when financial crisis hits, when health crisis hits close to home, you can't be moved. I mean, the wind's blowing and you definitely feel it. But boy, if it's built on just your own beliefs or your own ideas or your being in control, and if you haven't figured this out already, 99% of life is what happens, and the 1% is, how we respond to it. And we have so little control. I think the myth of control has definitely been, busted. And I talked to your dad a few weeks ago about this, like he said, we've all lost something in this crisis. Like, if there's anything this is going to teach all of us, is that we just don't have control like maybe we thought we did. And so that's, again, like, leaning not on our own understanding, but in all our ways acknowledging him, and he will direct our paths. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, like, don't lean on what you know, lean on God, and he'll get you and take you through this, and you'll capture and understand and recognize more of these divine moments that he has that are just so amazing and beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah, so it's funny, as I think I remember what stood out to me when you did that sermon, and then there's what continues to go off in my mind, the aha moments of like, oh yeah, that was another thing. Like, I believe there is such security in knowing that God is in charge of it all, because I think I have this natural tendency to fear doing it wrong, to fear not getting it right. And I really felt like, because there's just so many things going on behind the scenes for our benefit, and that it really is being orchestrated and it's not up to chance. So, I don't believe that means we can just sit back and do nothing. I don't believe you guys are not giving you guys permission to just sit around and meditate and pray everything works out all right. But I am saying that there should be comfort in knowing, even in our, even in all the things that we're doing, we have a God who will absolutely do whatever it takes to get us where he needs us to be. And it's interesting because there's been times in my life where the busyness, that's probably one of my downfalls, is my busyness, to slow down and to really see where he's directing me, right? And yet there's been some comical times, whether I'm getting stuck in a elevator, literally won't move until I just let him speak what he needs to speak to me, or point me in a direction, that I go, oh my gosh, and I would have missed that. So thankfully, he's so kind and sweet that he knows my personality. He's willing to kind of shake me up a little bit to make sure that I don't miss what he's trying to do in and through my life. And so, yeah, but it's a powerful one for me, Jeff. I mean, divine appointments. There is no such thing as happenstance. I don't believe it.
Yeah, I don't either. And I really, and you really are a great model of what you just said too, is like, we got to roll up our sleeves and we got to do our thing, and we do want to think about our steps in life. But there's a great phrase, I can't remember where it came from, but I remember hearing it and it stuck with me. It's like, we do the natural, God does the super, and that supernatural timing and the divinity of these moments that we have, they happen when we're doing something to put ourselves in a position, where God can get our attention. As you were talking too, I was thinking that one of the other things about hearing him, I really believe, is getting out of your routine. We do these summer camps, and I think summer camps are really important for kids and even for us, because when you geographically move, your heart just opens, the barriers come down. I tell parents and adults, it's like when you go on a trip or on a vacation, you're excited, you go to new restaurants, you try new things, you spend typically more money, and sometimes you come home and you go, man, that was dumb. Why did I buy that? Or what, you know what I'm saying? But like, you go to restaurants you'd never go to, But you do that because you're out of your routine. And when you can get out of your routine and try and do things, it really is another powerful way that God can get a hold of your attention.
That's really good. Yeah. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, this just came to me. How many people that are listening right now wonder, God, are you there? God, have you been there for me? And especially right now with so many of the things happening, like, where are you, God? Where are you? And I think that's another reason, because Jeff, when I was 16, I got in that bad car accident. I don't know if you remember that or not, but yeah. I heard you speak after, probably 3 or 4 years after that. And you got to believe for several years. And even today, I have no why, Lord, why? I just realized it directed my life in a different direction. And that's exactly what needed to happen in that space. And thank the Lord that he saved me, because he must not have been finished with me yet, right? Or I could have already gone to heaven and called it a day. But, I think truly that if we are questioning that and we're asking that, do what Jeff said when he started. He said, take a minute to write down some of your most life-altering moments that you just cannot deny that there might have been something more to that. And I think it's a great way. In the Old Testament, it was the process. It was the practice of remembering, right? It was setting up like a pile of rocks to remember what the Lord did for the Israelites, taking them into the promised land, because we're very forgetful. I could go on and on about that. That could be a whole nother podcast. But what I heard you say a minute ago, write down your most life-altering moments, and chances are those were absolutely setups, not setbacks. Might have felt like a setback, might have felt like the hardest time in your life, and I believe it was a setup for part of who you are today and where you are today. And you may not even be fully there yet, but you can trust knowing that absolutely that was a divine appointment. His hand is at work in and through your life.
Yeah, and he is always working ahead. And, Cammie, in full transparency too, and a lot of the backstory, but over the last couple months, I've been, wrestling with some of the things that have happened in my own life and my own faith with, connected to COVID and how it's impacted a lot of what we do and what we were planning for years. And, if you're there and you're wondering, I would just say and I can make you a promise here that if you're willing to wait long enough and your eyes are wide open, you will see God working. And I really think the failure, it's not on God's end. And I don't say that lightly or out of naivete, but when we are willing to wait long enough, we will recognize the divine around us that God's doing. And he really is working on your behalf as you listen to this, whether you like God or not, or care about him or not. Regardless, he's so good. That doesn't matter. He is working on your behalf and pursuing you because he loves you. And he does have an amazing path for you to walk on. And I've just found the further away that you walk, the harder it gets. But it's like a GPS, there's always that course correction. If you're going a different path to get there, there's this constant thing, and the Bible calls it the Holy Spirit. There's this autocorrect. There's this constant adjustment. So we can, all of us have made really dumb mistakes, and we've blown it, and we've gone our own way. The Bible is so clear about that. But all it takes is just one step to turn around, and we can be right back headed in the direction. And God's there. He's not waiting to club us over the head. He's helping to want us to turn towards where he's going.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I love it. Well, I wanted you to share that, and I don't know who needed to hear that. Maybe I needed to hear it again. Maybe I needed to hear that again and didn't even know it. But I really believe that divine appointments are happening and have happened multiple times in our lives if we'll just look for them. And sometimes it takes getting a little bit ahead to look back and go, oh my gosh, I can see his hand in that. Like I said, in the moment I was going through my car accident, I remember thinking, what on earth? Why, what reason? And you guys, that's not even taking into account, it was my fault for going too fast on the road. So there's sometimes we have a part in the consequences or the redirecting, but I truly believe that it's all part of a grander plan. So I think that's cool. I think it's cool that you had an appointment at the camp, that you were supposed to be there, and yet you got switched to another camp, which wasn't even where the college was, but it put you guys into a space where if you guys see each other at a place like that, you better believe when you get back to college, you're going to run into each other more times because it's a small world.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Small world. Well, Jeff, anything else you want to leave us with today? I mean, I'm excited about July 4th. I really am looking forward to partnering with you in prayer for our country, the well-being of our country, for our government officials, our leaders, the next generation. I'm excited to partner with them in that. If you're going to make me be a sage, I guess I'll do it. But I really just feel, I love that you gave us things to look for, whether it's a pattern, just a feeling, a sense, and you see a pattern connected, and it's timing, it's very personalized. My friend, God is doing something in your life, and it'll be pretty special as it unfolds. I mean, obviously you were granted with the love of your life, 3 beautiful daughters. Could you have stopped that if you tried, or do you feel like things just kept guiding you intentionally to this place?
Oh man, I think there is a part that we play where we are obedient, for sure. And, but some things, man, they just almost seem inevitable. And that takes you to a crazy debate that's been going on forever. It's like, and if you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, one of the things that movie's about is it all happened by chance, or is it like us directing it? And the wisdom of that, movie is that whoever wrote that script was a politician, because at the end it basically said it's both. It's like, if you remember watching the movie, there's that feather that blew around in the air, and it was at the beginning and the end, and that tied the movie together. But it was like, Forrest Gump is saying, are we just floating around in a breeze, or are we like setting our own path? And he goes, I believe it's kind of both. And I really, that's where I land is, we have a part to play, but God's so much greater. And I'm grateful for that. I can rest at night no matter what's happening in my life, because I know that God has me in his hands, and he's, protecting me. And that doesn't mean I'm always safe or I don't go through hard times, because, faith doesn't mean it's not a safety net, but it's a guide, and it's power. I always say God doesn't want to make you safe. He wants to make you strong. And I believe that's true. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling, at risk, if you embrace what God's doing, it may be really tough. You can't grow without going through pain, ever. You can't build muscle without tearing it. You can't go through any growth without the threshold of pain that you have to cross. But that's okay, because I felt my own life getting stronger through COVID. I've adopted some new patterns. I've lost weight. I've gotten into a lot better shape than I've been in a long time. So when things happen like that, you can really embrace the difficulty. Don't run away from it.
That's good. That's really good. And it sure gives you a whole lot more assurance a part of as you go through that process. I'll never forget just getting some news on my own health over a year ago. And I remember when it happened, enough things had been happening, and I knew this enough to go, like caught my breath. But then I went, okay, God, what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do this? So having that flexibility when things are changing and evolving, and just realizing that there's something greater on the other side of this. So that's awesome. Jeff, thank you so much again. Make sure you follow Jeff on Instagram, and that's Jeff Eckart. It's Jeff Eckart. Don't let me spell it wrong. Jeff, what is the spelling? Eckart. Eckart. Yep. I love it. And you can post any feedback. We'd love to hear your comments, and tag us on Instagram, and we would be happy to see kind of what hit home for you today. And actually, you can go ahead and leave a review on my podcast, I would really appreciate that. And you always are more than welcome to give me some feedback about what you're looking for. And so we can come together as we continue to meet together, because I truly believe when a leader gets better, the world gets better. And that's why I love tapping into the whole idea of what do leaders do? We're not just talking about professionally, we're talking personally, we're talking with your kids, we're talking about all the hats you wear. Learning about leadership is very powerful, and I believe divine appointments definitely has something to do with it. Thank you, Jeff, for joining me today.
Yes, enjoyed it. Thanks, Kim. Thanks for all you do. You make the world a better place.
Thank you, Jeff.